work for the NHS. You've had a great idea, you've made it happen, and it's made a big difference to how we can learn from COVID-19 and enter a new normal. Ideas like yours drive improvement and they deserve to be shared. That's what BOB does. Amplifying good ideas like yours across the NHS so as many people as possible can learn from, adapt and implement your idea. The further good ideas are shared by the BOB community who learn from them, the greater improvement we can achieve. You made a change. Share your solution with others. Speak to BOB.
Hello and welcome everyone to one of our last sessions of the BOB programme at this year's Giant Festival, but hopefully just as engaging. So in this session, you might be wondering why it's called Cinderella and where does Cinderella come into it, Cinderella spread and scale. Well, to explain that, we often hear a lot in the media about access to medicines or lack of, postcode lotteries and the like, particularly around oncology. But we're actually starting to see a sea change in the way that medtech is conveyed in the media in that spread and scale story. Previously, we've not actually heard that much about medtech adoption and access to medtech, hence the Cinderella. But we are getting a bit of a change and brought about by the pandemic. So all of a sudden, we're hearing about PCR tests and lateral flow tests and other things that average person on the street would never have heard of previously. So we're starting to see medtech come out of the shadows, which is great. So today we want to focus on the positives of how we can keep this shift going and explore this topic further. So we've got 4 fantastic speakers with us today, 2 with a very much a helicopter view, and then 2 from a sort of on the ground individual perspective from in a company. So we're just about to find out who our speakers are, but we also would like to know who you are. So there should be a poll that's going live in the next minute or so on screen. So please do tell us where you're from, and if it's not covered by one of the options, then you can put in the chat. Please also do make use of the chat to share your thoughts, comments, or ask any questions, and we'll be covering off questions and answers towards the end of the session. So while we're finding out who you all are, I'd like to introduce our speakers. So first off, Sally, would you like to kick us off?
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Sally Chisholm. I'm hoping that there'll be a few people on here that know me, but for those of you that don't, my background is that I spent over 30 years working in the NHS, starting as a frontline health professional delivering care and working my way throughout my career to a point where I was involved in some really interesting roles around helping NHS organisations and clinical teams to improve services and ultimately to adopt innovation. I suppose the 2 main roles that were involved was firstly that I was the chief executive of the NHS Technology Adoption Centre, which was an organisation entirely focused on helping to support NHS organisations to take new innovative technologies and to bring them into clinical practice. And that's where I had my first exposure really to working with industry and trying to understand their frustrations and the difficulties that they often had in navigating the NHS. And I finished my NHS career working at NICE in a role that was entirely focused on supporting the uptake and the use of medical diagnostics and technologies and digital products, actually helping that guidance to be brought into use in NHS organisations. So I then left the NHS and I brought all of that knowledge and the learning that I had into my own organisation, HTAS, which is where I obviously work today and why I've been asked to join this. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Go to Nick next, please.
Hi there, my name is Nick Lansman. I've been for 25 years advising companies in tech and healthcare of how to engage with the system and to understand policy and those developments and how it impacts on their businesses. About 4 years ago, I was involved in setting up and founding the HealthTech Alliance, which is a coalition of health tech companies, but also importantly, bringing together key stakeholders from the NHS and wider bodies. And that grouping really helps to look at issues surrounding barriers to adoption of medtech and alleviating them. Sally is involved, so we have all the Sally's involvement and experience involved in the Health Tech Alliance as well. The chair of the Health Tech Alliance is Dame Barbara Haken, who was the former deputy CEO of the NHS. So we have some great expertise. Equally important is the involvement of the members themselves, who have expertise from both big companies and small companies and drive the agenda of the organisation.
Thank you. I go to Andrew.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Andrew Thelwell. I'm Chief Commercial Officer for a company called Sky Medical Technology, which is a UK-based medtech company, innovative company. My background is over 30 years experience in medtech. I've worked for a large American corporation, a large British corporation, and then a couple of SMEs. So I've seen everything in terms of innovation from the industry side, from large budgets, large clinicals, etc., down to trying to work out how to spend investors' money in the best possible way because we're not generating our own. So I think that gives me an interesting perspective on the whole spread of companies within the industry, medtech industry, and the different challenges for the smaller companies vis-a-vis the larger companies. We've got in Sky, we've got a wearable bioelectronic device. We're trying to bring it into DVT prevention, orthopedic, post-op recovery, and also wound care. And each of those three different pathways have different needs and different behaviours as well. So hopefully as this session goes on, I'll be able to bring in some examples, real life examples of what it's like when you're working with clinicians and patients and trying to bring innovations into practice.
Thank you, Andrew. And finally, can I go to Giovanna?
Hello. Thank you for having me on the session. I'm Giovanna Forte. I'm CEO of Forte Medical, a company that was set up to realise an NHS GP's innovation. And that NHS GP is my brother, Dr. Vincent Forte, who's also a medical author. He identified an overlooked area of diagnostic medicine, which is urine specimen collection, which although urine has diagnostic parity with blood, there is no protocol, which results in 1 in 4 specimens being contaminated, leading to repeat testing, unreliable diagnosis, and the overprescribing of antibiotics. So I've been introducing PZ Midstream to the NHS for 16 years. We now have NHS support for scale up. We're on the framework, and we are about to go digital with a home urine testing pack. We know the device reduces primary care lab spend by 66%. It ticks all the NHS diagnostic ambitions, and we're also now looking at first stream urine for early stage cancer testing, sports dope collection, it takes 2 specimens from the same stream, and more. So we have PZ Midstream and we have the specimen collection on the way. That's what we're doing.
Thanks very much, Giovanna. So to kick off our discussions now, firstly, I'm going to turn to Nick. As you've mentioned, from the HealthTech Alliance, it's highly relevant to our discussion today. And I know that you've just launched a report just a couple of weeks back titled Transforming the MedTech Landscape, COVID and Beyond, which the link should be appearing in the chat in a moment. So could you just tell us a little bit more, share some of the highlights from your report? And I know there are 15 recommendations in there, so it'd be good to hear a little bit more about those.
Yeah, of course. So just to say, the report, as you say, was published 2 weeks ago, and we've been having, I hear, some good feedback from it, partly because it's quite short and sweet and doesn't ramble on too long. I think one of the key objectives of the report was to bring the knowledge of the members into it. So we had a lot of consultations with the members to get those insights from them, particularly looking at the first peak of COVID and what learnings we could get from that. And the ideas of how we could use the NHS to pull innovation into the NHS rather than having to, I suppose, drag innovation to the NHS. So we looked at it in two forms. First part of it was looking at the challenges and barriers. And the second part, as you say, identify 15 recommendations. I'm not going to go into detail on everything, but I'll come up with some highlights. I think one of the first problems was an area of definition. Of course, medtech is a blanket term that doesn't help itself. It's everything from single-use consumables to complex hospital equipment, diagnostics, etc., and everything in between. And that, in a sense, is part of the issue. I think defining what we do is very difficult. Innovation might mean a product that is tried and tested and the standard of care in certain markets with lots of evidence. And the same word innovation implies something that is yet to acquire a suitable amount of evidence. There's a well-known statistic published that it takes 17 years from getting a product from clinical introduction to right up to adoption. Obviously, it was way too long. And some of the reasons for that is the fragmented system. If NICE at the centre says this is a product that should be used, then the bureaucracy at the local level can stop that implementation. And what it means is that medtech companies have to go trust to get adoption, which is quite frustrating. I've mentioned about the evidence problem. Another issue is short-termism, looking at the focus on affordability, this going down to the lowest level of unit price for a product, rather than looking at this long-term benefit to the patient and those patient outcomes. Then there's the issue of signposting. There's lack of signposting where there's a number of bodies that have perhaps an overlapping remit, and it's confusing for companies. Do they go to HealthTech Connect? Do they go to the AAC? Do they go to the academic health science networks or to NHSX? And that confusion is also one of the key barriers. Then there's incentivization. We have legislation, the 2012 Health and Social Care Act, which split the payer-provider and introduced competition into the situation. But that focus on competition means that you can have these disincentives. So hospitals get paid to perform a certain procedure or insert a medical device. And of course, if new technology comes in that's cheaper, there's a disincentive for that hospital to take up the new cheaper medicines or cheaper products, because obviously they get less money. So that's just a few of the barriers. What were some of the solutions? One of them was adopting best practice, not just in the UK, but also looking at best practice abroad. One of the discussions looked at how the German system of reimbursement could be considered. Then in terms of COVID, there was a number of issues with looking at the real priority of the patient backlog that we have, looking at postcode lotteries and really looking at where focus should be in the system. What should we focus on? And that looking at the official figures and the real figures was felt to be one of the issues that should be considered. Then as we move to ICSs, these integrated care systems, away from CCGs and what we have now, there was felt a recommendation to make sure those bodies have the necessary tools and leadership to drive innovation, because innovation doesn't just happen on its own. It requires it to be adopted and take up and be supported along the way. What else was that? Fast tracking the work of the AAC, the Accelerated Access Collaborative, looking at the rapid uptake products. Well, obviously there's very few rapid uptake products, and we could have more of those. So that the work of bodies like the AAC and indeed the ICSs, and this move away from competition to collaboration and partnership was a key recommendation. And then there's others. I mentioned long-term funding was another recommendation, where we have to give sufficient stability to bodies such as the academic health science network, so that companies who are looking to introduce their new technologies have places to go that know they'll be around for the foreseeable future. So that's just a snapshot of some of the barriers and recommendations, but I'm sure we'll discuss more later on.
Thanks very much, Nick. And yeah, we look forward to spreading the report more widely, because it's a great piece. Sally, I'd like to turn to you now, also from sort of that helicopter viewpoint. I'm sure a lot of what Nick's just talked about really resonates with you, and across your sort of broad brush of clients and working with multiple organisations, both large and small, it'd be good to just hear a little bit more about what the broad challenges to adoption are that you've been seeing across the medtech industry. Oh, you're on mute there, Sally.
That's right. I thought I'd pressed it, but obviously I hadn't. Right. Yeah, interesting question, and I could probably wax lyrical for hours, but you'll be reassured to know that I'm not going to. I think when I first work with companies who are starting to try, and actually sometimes have had many years of trying to engage with the NHS, one of the things that people find quite overwhelming is simply its complexity as an organisation. All the different elements of it, everything, of course, there is NHS England and NHS Improvement that are increasingly coming together. You have obviously the Department of Health and Social Care based down in London. You have NAHR, you have NICE, you now have entities, very valuable and useful entities like the Accelerated Access Collaborative, whose membership is multifactorial. And people struggle to try and understand how these all interrelate to each other. So, for example, if you think about some of the initiatives that you see as well around that are all within the NHS and trying to drive improvement in services, which of course so often can be supported by the use of medtech and diagnostics, etc. You have initiatives like Getting It Right First Time, which is driven from NHS organisations visiting each other and generating information and data and ideas about how individual organisations could improve their care delivery. But then you also have organisations like NHS Right Care that is collecting data and helping organisations to benchmark themselves against comparators. And then you have NHS Digital, which uses data which is collected from hospitals, etc., like the health, the HES data. And then you have organisations like NHS Digital that is trying to transform care through the use of digital technologies. And actually that trying to unravel who is responsible for which bits of the system is often something that is overwhelming for people. And I will confess that it's now sort of 4.5 years since I left NICE, and I find it hard, even though I've spent 30 years in the NHS, to keep up with all the changes. So that is certainly, I think, a very tricky aspect that people are frequently challenged with and sort of head scratching. Layered over the top of that, of course, is NHS strategy, and we have the NHS long-term plan. But underneath that, there's then lots of elements that make that up. So even if you think about something like cancer care, there's a whole raft of infrastructure to support improvements in cancer care, and that then gets broken down into different types of cancer. And once again, sometimes companies really struggle to know who they should be looking to and who they should be talking to try and understand, when they've got innovative products, how they might actually best be able to bring that to the NHS and help to improve outcomes. And then, of course, there are multiple NHS organisations, and as many of the people who perhaps are on this call are aware, if you want to bring a product to the NHS, you frequently, unless you're lucky enough to be included in any of their national initiatives, you frequently have to literally go to individual organisations once, one at a time. And that is a huge resource impact that often, certainly SMEs, when they're first starting out, they really, really struggle to be able to do that. But every NHS organisation also has slightly different ways of doing things, different processes in terms of how you produce a business case or what their procurement systems are, etc. And so it's a complete minefield. So that's a sort of an overarching element. One of the things, of course, people are most interested about is how they convince the NHS that their product actually works and that it's going to bring benefits to the NHS, both from a clinical perspective in terms of evidence, but also from a cost-effective basis, because especially with the NHS being under such financial constraint, it has to be very careful, of course, about what it spends its money on. Now, certainly, no NHS organisation in this era of governance and on the back of some spectacularly sad failures of care that we've seen over the years should be or will be wanting to introduce products where it's not clear that they are safe and efficacious. And of course, in the arena of clinical evidence, randomised control trials are always viewed as being the gold standard, and it's certainly something that NICE elects to focus on whenever it possibly can for all the right reasons. But of course, when you and that's maybe relatively easy, I say in inverted commas, when you're looking at pharmaceutical products, because if you are asking a patient to take a tablet, it's very easy to give them a placebo, and they don't know, and the people that are running the research don't know what the patient's actually got. So in terms of measuring the benefits and the outcomes, it's not easy, but it's relatively simple. By the time you're looking at medical technologies and diagnostics, it's quite hard to hide from the clinician and sometimes the patient what the actual piece of equipment is that you're using or what diagnostic test is being applied. And therefore, being able to generate randomized data is particularly tricky, and that is a challenge when it is so highly valued by the people that are evaluating products. Real world evidence is fortunately increasingly being given an awful lot more of emphasis, and and this is something that NICE has been talking about for a long time. But I find that often organizations struggle to be able to work out what the real world evidence should be and how they should be collecting it. And it's really good news that the academic health science networks have been given a role in helping to develop that. And I know that many of them are working with industry partners to help them to collect that data. We're still not quite there yet, I think, in terms of how that is interpreted and valued, but we are heading in the right direction. Of course, the other aspects of data collection in the form of clinical trials is whether or not data is prospective or retrospective. And again, that they have different values, and companies sometimes are really never quite sure which is the best route for them to go. So in an overarching way, I'm just trying to explain that in my experience, this is an area where companies really do need often some support. And the other aspect of that is that so often I sadly see when research has been sponsored by companies who are really trying to demonstrate how effective their products are, the very fact that they have sponsored the research is somehow viewed as being tainted. And that's actually a real, I'll call it an oxymoron, because it's a very difficult problem to solve. I suppose the other element, of course, is about cost effectiveness, and that goes hand in hand with the clinical effectiveness in the modern NHS. And often people just simply don't know where to start with that. And in fairness, one of the problems that I find a lot of the time when I am helping companies to review evidence that they have already has been published for their product is that because the focus of the evidence is primarily on demonstrating clinical effectiveness, the data that actually helps to prove cost effectiveness, so for example, reductions in the length of time that people need treatment for, the numbers of treatments that people might need, even in terms of something like dressing, wound care, how frequently dressings get changed, and all of those sorts of things that combine, or how long is spent in the operating theatre, who are the actual professionals that deliver the care. Can this be something that's delivered by staff that their salaries are not the highest, should I say? that data is often not collected in trials, and so companies often need support to work out how they're going to collect that information, and that needs usually a good relationship with clinical teams in NHS organisations that they can engage with, who are willing to collect that data for them. And finding those people to have those relationships is actually not often that easy. So I think the other element of that of this, just to sort of wrap up in relation to medical technologies and devices, is that often there are relatively long time frames that are needed to show that the outcomes are going to be continued. So just to think of an example, I'm just thinking about things that I wrote down earlier. Well, I suppose, you know, if for example somebody has spinal surgery and the particular piece of equipment is used, you need a number of years to know that, one, any benefits that are delivered immediately continue, and two, there are not complications over time. You might need 5, 6, 7 years to be really confident that that technology has achieved those long-term benefits and to demonstrate that long-term cost effectiveness. But in terms of what that means for SMEs in particular, but even sometimes some of the very large global companies I work with, that is a big ask to be able to make that demonstration. Whereas, of course, again, from a pharmaceutical perspective, that length of time is frequently not needed in the same way. So I think probably those are the main points that I would say are some, if not all, or certainly not all, of the complexities that companies face from a helicopter view.
Thanks so much, Sally. I think, as you've rightly said, it is a minefield, and there's so many different factors that impact on adoption, some of which we'll unpack today. But I think it's a conversation that could carry on for hours and hours. It feels like the right moment actually to just mention, and Neil has dropped the information in the chat, but we had a speaker from the Accelerated Access Collaborative earlier on today, and she was talking about the new innovation service, which is going to be coming in late summer 2021, and this is, you know, all about helping to tackle this problem and bringing forward innovation into the NHS. So we would implore you to go and check that out, and there is a call for user testers, so do check out the link and find out more about how you can get involved in that. So now we've heard from the sort of helicopter view, I'd now like to drill down to how medtech companies are experiencing it on the ground. So first off, I'd like to come to you, Andrew, and just find out a little bit more around some of the challenges and how you've been navigating sort of providing evidence provision for the Gecko device.
Sure. I'll just touch a little bit on linking back to the helicopter picture, and then I'd like to just move forward. And this is just our example. It's our product. It's our technology. It's our company. So, I think it's just useful getting that specificity. So I think the first thing I'd want to say from a helicopter perspective briefly is that I have lots of colleagues even inside our company who've got a pharmaceutical background. And the comment they always make is that medtech's very fortunate because we can come to market off the back of phase 2 studies. We don't need the big randomized controlled trial to come to market. And that's true, but it's very much a double-edged sword, because although we can come to the market with a relatively small phase 2 study, and that gives us a CE mark, what it means is we do not start on day one with definitive randomized evidence that our product is better than another product. Neither do we automatically get reimbursement. So if you look at wound care, for example, there's a positive list, the drug tariff for prescription, and you do not automatically go on the drug tariff. You get a CE mark and then you begin the process. So I think what's important to understand is that, yes, medtech can access the market early, but having said that, we cannot get immediate reimbursement. So what we did was we got the CE mark, regulatory approval. We then engaged all of the elements that have been mentioned. We've engaged SBRI, we've engaged AHSNs, we've engaged NICE. We've actually got NICE guidance Medicines Technology Guidance, MTG19, for our Gecko device. And we went and talked to everyone that we felt we needed to talk to. I'd absolutely echo the comments that Sally made, which is it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. And we probably didn't do it in the right order or at the right time. And I think the signposting, as both Nick and Sally have mentioned, could definitely be improved. But we did engage all those organisations, and we've had help from all of them. And in fact, our NICE guidance came off the back of scientific data. So this is all wonderful so far. But then when you actually get to the hospitals and the clinicians running the departments, then they say, okay, you've got NICE guidance. I think the wording says they have to take account of it if it's medical technologies guidance. So it's not mandatory. So they say, okay, interesting. Where's your clinical evidence? Where's your economic evidence? So we then have to start to build. And really the two options are exactly the ones that Sally referred to. You have a part of the market, the academic teaching hospitals, etc., that will say to you, you've got to start off with a large randomized control trial, placebo controlled, multiple arms, etc., etc. As an SME, that is beyond daunting. And in fact, you know, this is our device. It produces an electrical pulse. So we cannot create an effective placebo. It would be obvious as to whether it's working or not. So we can't make a pure protocol in the pharmaceutical sense of a randomized controlled trial. Our other option is real world data. But again, Sally's absolutely right. What do you include? What don't you include? How do you gather it? Is it credible? And with how many people? And will you end up having to repeat the exercise with every hospital and trust that you go to? The answer is yes, initially. So interestingly, on the wound care side, we've gone down the randomized controlled trial route because that's what the drug tariff said that they needed. On the DVT prevention side, we've gone down the real world data gathering. So I'll take the real world data gathering. So we approached the major academic hospitals. They all wanted us to go from scientific laboratory-based data directly to large-scale randomized controlled trials. That simply wasn't feasible for us financially, amongst anything else. So what we did was actually go out and talk to hospitals up and down the country who had a record of publishing in the field of DVT prevention, who'd maybe been involved in other studies. And they were, you know, large volume centres, not necessarily the most academically pure centres, if you like. That's no insult to them, but they will understand what I mean if they see this comment. So we were very fortunate to find at the University Hospital of North Midlands, the Royal Stoke Hospital. We were very fortunate to find a team, a professor, lead consultant, some band 765 nurses who were very passionate about stroke care. And they were excited by our scientific work. They were excited by the NICE guidance, and they really wanted to engage. And so they asked us whether or not we would be willing to engage in a real world data gathering exercise. So the idea was theirs. And that was, I remember the meeting. It was a Tuesday afternoon in Stoke, as it were, literally. And from there, we went through a long journey. So in the event, we worked up a suggested protocol. We worked up some forms. All of the internal permissions were obtained. So there were 3 levels of governance within the trust that had to be negotiated by the team there. You know, copious amounts of education and training and permissions, sign-offs, procurement department, pharmacy, finance department, compliance in terms of, as I said, governance and so on. So it probably took us a year to get into a position from the idea when we could enroll patients. And I'm delighted to say from the beginning to now, over 1,300 patients have been enrolled in that real world data analysis. And all they did was say, we will follow the existing stroke guidance for the UK. And where patients can tolerate and take and are appropriate for the current technologies that have been validated by randomized controlled trials, the patients will get those. But where 30% or 20% of all admitted patients cannot use the existing therapies, we will use this new therapy, because rather use the new therapy than not protect the patients at all. And this over 12 months, so the first 12 months, over 1,000 patients were engaged, and the study was written up. It's been published and presented in the UK. It's been presented internationally, and it has it's impacted our ability to get an FDA approval for DVT prevention. We still haven't necessarily got national rollout in the UK, but it certainly encouraged the Luton and Dunstable Hospital to do their own audit and repeat what's happened in a mini way. Swindon was the same, Kingston was the same. We had to do a level of audit for them too. But we're now getting to hospitals 6, 7, 8, 9, and we're beginning to get people saying, okay, if you've got a number of NHS hospitals that have all audited and found that they've all got this same problem, maybe we don't need to audit to find the problem. Maybe we just evaluate your technology. So we are beginning to see a rollout, but it's, a huge amount of time. And definitely it's trust by trust, hospital by hospital in the early days. And you have to repeat the exercise hospital by hospital. People are not willing to take one set of data and apply it. So on the a key point I would make is that without the leadership and the passion and the commitment of the clinical team in the Royal Stoke stroke unit, we could not have got there. So, despite all of the organizations at the helicopter level, if you like, that we've engaged with, who are excellent in doing a good job and all with the right intentions, when you're getting down to that hospital level, a number of the things that Nick talked about come into play. Are you going to make a saving within the financial year, the actual year? Who signs that off? Who takes on board the training costs and the education costs? We had to have pharmacy forms, prescription forms reprinted. I think we lost about a month and a half debating within the hospital who should sign that off, because there was a several £100 cost of reprinting those forms to add our Gecko device before we could start our evaluation. So we certainly had to stay very close to it and offer support all the way down the line. But, there was a huge amount of effort from the clinicians in the NHS doing the bedside role. And bearing in mind they have busy roles and they're full-time employees doing that role, to ask them to do an extra 20 or 25% of time to manage an innovation through the process seems difficult to me. And as I say, without their passion for improving patient care, we would have never have made it. So I think from my experience, it's great that there's so much political will, if you like, with a small p, within the health system to bring innovation in. But we've got to remember, it always ends up with a doctor or a nurse or someone on a ward having to fill in the forms, apply the devices and do whatever it is. And I think we can do a lot more, not only from a health system side, but from an industry side, in helping that whole process. So particularly with real world data, there's a phrase from a play I like, and it's depending on the kindness of strangers. And I guess my summary of real world gathering in particular is, to some extent, both the NHS and industry are depending on the kindness of strangers at the bedside level. And we're depending on them working into the evenings and working weekends to fill in forms, to complete clinical data, to get innovations into the NHS. I'd love to think we could all do more to support them.
Thank you, Andrew. Some really interesting insights. And I'd just like to flag as well that there's a brilliant story from the team directly in the Royal Stoke University Hospital, Dr. Indira Natarajan, who's done a fantastic piece about exactly how Gecko was implemented. So the link should be appearing in the chat shortly.
Yes, that's on the BOB.health stream, and as you rightly say, Chloe, it's from the horse's mouth, as it were. It's from Dr. Nasarajan and the team, and if anyone reads that piece, they will see all of the practicalities and all of the very, very many complex things that had to be done inside the hospital to get this project from idea to delivery.
Thanks, Andrew. So, Giovanna, I'd like to turn to you now and unpack a little bit more about what your experiences have been around sort of gathering that evidence provision to get PESI adopted.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me on. Our evidence gathering has been a little up and down. One of the first studies we had with PESI midstream, which captures the midstream part of the urine specimen, that is accurate, because we found from our research that 1 in 4 urine specimens are inaccurate. There is no protocol for collecting urine, and despite midstream being the recommended part of the stream, there is no guaranteed way to achieve that. So where you have blood and urine that have diagnostic parity, you have very strict protocols around blood and none around urine. So when my GP brother, Dr. Vincent Forte, invented PESI, it was to actually tackle this problem of women coming back for repeat urinary tract infection that he thought he treated. I suppose one of the problems we've had is that we're highlighting a hitherto completely overlooked area of diagnostic medicine. Because urine is a waste product, it hasn't commanded the respect that it deserves from a diagnostic point of view. One of the first trials we had at the Royal Free compared PESI collection with ordinary collection straight into a tube. And the protocol said that all PESI samples would be dipped and cultured along with everything else. Now, when we got the results, they said PESI doesn't work. It took me a while because I don't come from this background, but I studied the paper that was published. And actually, when they dipped the PESI samples, if there was no result on the dipstick, they discarded the sample and they didn't culture it. So in effect, they threw away every single piece of positive evidence that we had, because the dipstick will respond to contamination in the sample. If there is no contamination, it won't respond. So that study actually causes an awful lot of problems of people saying, look, it doesn't work. But the people that look at these papers don't actually always check that the protocol has been followed. In that case, it wasn't. A, in that respect, and B, in the respect it didn't use the number of patients it said it would. So that was one hiccup. We have had since a lot of very good evidence. Public Health Wales trial PESI in primary care, and they have said, from a clinical perspective, we have seen the number of prescriptions for antibiotics reduce, as well as the number of mixed growth culture results. We were able to get the best outcomes for our patients in the quickest and safest manner. Now, for the most common diagnostic liquid, to achieve that result is fantastic. We also know that Public Health Wales estimated a 66% saving on lab spend, which brings me to another hurdle that we've encountered, where I have approached some of the labs that are commissioned by the NHS to provide lab services. I have been told there is no way we would use or recommend use of your device, because we are paid per specimen, and if you reduce those specimens to the extent you say you do, you will knock £500,000 off our bottom line. So unless those providers to the NHS who are providing those services are incentivized to save money, they're not going to do it. So something like PESI that will improve diagnostics, it'll improve the accuracy of results, it'll improve right first time diagnostic and prescribing. If it's actually being resisted by the very people who are processing those results, you know, we've really had to struggle to overcome those sorts of situations. Another hurdle, sorry, I'm doing the hurdles first, is that somehow where pharma, when there is a new drug released or vaccine, as we know, the people who've made that and the name of it are widely written about. They're widely acknowledged, you know, isn't this great? When you have a device, it's slightly different, because 3 years ago, I think the person responsible for this has since retired, but one of the Get It Right First Time leads said to me, we're not here to promote a device. Well, but this device gets things right first time, so how does that work? More recently, I approached the RCGP to sponsor an e-learning module on urine collection, just generically urine collection. And they came back to me and said, our concern is that the method to collect urine safely can only be done utilising your device. Therefore, we feel it made point to promoting your product. So the answer to that was no. So you have a professional body that is there to help their members do no harm, but it won't actually tell them how and allow them to make their own decision about whether or not they take up that device. I don't know about you, but I'm quite shocked by that. So devices and prevention seem to me to be the Cinderella of any kind of adoption in the NHS and in the private sector. You know, that operate very much on the same levels. The more people they have going into the hospitals, the more money they get paid. Now, I might be cynical and maybe be shot down for that, but if someone can point out to me how that doesn't work, I'd be very grateful. We have something that was overlooked that we've highlighted. We have got our message across. We are getting take-up. We're being used increasingly in antenatal clinics because obviously if you're pregnant, you don't want antibiotics you don't need that you are prescribed as a result of a false positive or a contaminated urine sample. So we have take-up there. We are being rolled out across Wales from this month. And the Eastern AHSN have looked at everything we've done and said, this makes absolute sense. Yes, we will support you for national scale up. So really, it's been the latest iteration of PEASY came out 5 years ago, and it's taken that long to get the right evidence and the right support ready for scale up. One thing that COVID has done for us is helped us kind of pivot, because obviously when people weren't going to their GP surgery, sales fell off a cliff, and we all sat there scratching our heads saying, oh, what do we do now? Oh, let's make a home test. So Test Card and we are getting together, and we're creating a digital home testing kit, which we are hoping that we can collaborate with the NHS diagnostic leadership and have that sent to patients when they present with UTI or antenatal screening. The result can then go straight to the patient record. And because that kit will test from midstream, it will be the most accurate home urine test on the market. Because we do have, I'm happy to say, the only midstream urine collection kit in the world. So that's my summary. It's not been easy, but it's possible. But there are vested interests that get in the way, and those really have to be tackled head on by NHS leadership, so that devices are given parity with pharma, because, you know, prevention is much safer and cheaper than cure.
Thanks, Giovanna. We've actually just got a comment in the chat there about, is there any reflection from the panel, like put this to the whole panel, on when you've got, like Giovanna, you've got a device that people don't see that unmet need at face value. Any reflections there from the others on how to tackle that?
One, if I might add, one of the issues is the silo budget thinking, which is gradually being broken down within the NHS, which is the budget that will buy something like PEASY at you know, around 90p, 99p, isn't the budget that will save, which is the lab budget. So that silo thinking will also becomes a barrier to purchase. So those things need to be joined up by leadership, which is what they've done in Wales. They've looked at the overall saving and said, right, this works.
So it's Sally here. I think my view on that would be that it's finding the person that actually is dealing with the problem, because I recognise what Giovanna says about disincentives for organisations, etc. But somebody will be dealing with the consequences of not having the access to a technology or a device or whatever that actually could be solving a problem. And you can do that on many levels. You can do it on a clinical level, because as Andrew said, at the end of the day, you talked about it in the context of data collection. But at the end of the day, of course, it's the frontline staff that end up using these products. And it has to be making a difference to their care delivery and the outcomes for it to get any traction whatsoever. Yeah. But sometimes I think it's very easy to miss I'll call it miss the trick of what it is the challenges are that an organisation is struggling with and how your product can actually make a contribution. So just at a very, very high level, if you have a product, that means that whereas a patient may have had to have come to hospital 4 times a year to have a checkup, but your product will mean that either that can happen remotely or actually they only need to come once a year. If that organisation has got a significantly long waiting list for patients to have either initial appointments or a follow-up appointment, and you can take out of the system the need for multiple visits by people, you've potentially seriously contributed to that organisation resolving a waiting list problem.
Yeah, if I might comment there, I mean, something like Peasy, one of my more naive mistakes is to go around talking about urine collection, which I realise I've done again today. But actually, it impacts AMR, it impacts patient safety, it impacts infection control, and it impacts unplanned hospital admissions. So just on some stats, 50% of the global rise of AMR has a urinary source. So that must be because people are being prescribed antibiotics they don't need because their specimens are unreliable. The last Unplanned Admissions Committee data on this shows that 184,000 people were unplanned hospital admissions were because of untreated UTI, and that cost the NHS 434 million to treat. So those messages to all those different people, getting that across simultaneously is quite difficult. If we go to the admissions people and say, you could have saved 434 million by collecting urine specimens properly, they'll look at us and go, you're nuts. Communicating that is something that I would love help with, because we have so many different strands of information that boil down to one very simple thing. And I agree with you, it makes the frontline staff's life a lot easier. Watford Antenatal Clinic, they've said they save over 40% of nurse time not calling people back in for repeat tests. But they didn't realise that until they started using it.
I think it's a really good question, actually. And I think, again, there's 2 aspects to it. I think it speaks back to what I said before about people at the bedside are busy. They've got full-time jobs. So they're too busy to put together the story of the unmet need. So the emphasis really is on the company, the person, the company bringing the solution has got more responsibility to put that story together. And also it can be very difficult for the reasons Giovanna just said there. If you work in a particular department, but the downstream effects of something going wrong are in a different department, or you're in the hospital and the downstream effects are out in the community, then you wouldn't have any visibility on those anyway. For us, getting people out after knee surgery very quickly from the hospital is something that everyone says is a good idea. Well, if you track the number of emergency room visits and you track the number of readmissions and revisions, then maybe it's not always such a good idea. But it's very difficult for individual people in individual parts of that value chain, if you like, to get that data together. So I do think as an industry, again, we've got to be really clear, and I think Sally made the point well. We've got to be really clear on an unmet need for who, and what difference does it make? What happens now? What will happen after your innovation has been brought in, and who does it impact, and how does it impact them? And just saying there's an unmet need isn't enough for the reasons that I just mentioned. I think you've got to be able to paint the whole picture, and then you've got to be able to work out how that impacts the system in a way that it genuinely is a benefit.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. It actually ties in really nicely with this. We held a session yesterday, which was actually bringing together pharma and medtech to compare and contrast around this whole topic of spread and scale and adoption in the NHS. And actually, you probably end up disagreeing, but there was actually quite a lot of similarity between the two. Exactly as we've just discussed around this need to take a bigger picture look at the whole system and sort of seeing where it fits in within the system and how as an organisation you can support around that. That really came across as a key theme, and everyone agreed on that. So I'd just like to turn to Nick actually and just pick up on your thoughts on this topic as well, and just if you've got anything to add to what we've just been discussing there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of things. This is, I mean, you mentioned the difference there between health tech and pharma. I think there's big differences. You mentioned them earlier. The key one is that once you get guidance or approval from NICE for medicines, you get the money, and you don't get it with health tech. And this is why it's very important. This new medtech funding mandate that has been delayed because of COVID. It hopefully will be out in spring of next year, which will mean there will be this contractual obligation that if your product, your device, your diagnostic is approved by NICE and it has cost savings, then you will get funding for it, and you won't have to go hospital to hospital. It will automatically happen. So that's what is on the horizon, which is very positive. I suppose the sticking point there is that there's still the need to make cost savings in a single year, and that's the bit that we hope will be removed, because it's just simply not sensible to leave that in, because the savings that are there. The second point I make is, I think once you have integrated care systems properly in place and people can see the big picture, so you're not having this sort of artificial competition between payer and provider where, oh, it's not my saving, I don't want to pay for it. That will be hopefully removed once we move to these ICSs, where the people who are seeing the whole picture have the money and then can pay appropriately for what is required to achieve better patient outcomes. So on the horizon are really important changes that are going to happen. And what I would say is that the industry needs to become more effective at lobbying for those changes to happen, so that we support the AAC, the Accelerated Access Collaborative, we support the academic health science networks, and lobby harder. I remember one of the very first meetings of the HealthTech Alliance, and we had a very senior person from the NHS. And I asked the question, what is it, the difference? Why does pharma get a bigger slice of the action? Why do they get the Cancer Drugs Fund, where for effectively drugs that NICE said they wouldn't approve? And the answer, as he said, is because they get in our face, because they push hard and make sure they make their arguments effective for why the change must happen. And I think it was quite a blunt answer, but it's a message back to industry that we need to become better at advocating for our new products, our new innovations, and making people understand that the savings might be down the line, but the real benefits are to patient outcomes, which might only happen in year 2 and 3 and so on. But we need to keep pushing hard.
Thanks, Nick. I'm just we're running short on time now, and I want to make sure that we have some time to take the questions from the audience. So I'm going to ask you to be quite quick fire in your response, and I'm going to come to you first, Sally, and ask you, what would be your one key piece of advice for any health tech companies as they look to roll out their innovations? Oh, you're on mute there, Sally.
There's always one, isn't there? Right, one, that's tricky. I think because it's about being able to get traction in the NHS. So I think it is my point about really understand that bigger picture in terms of the pressures that NHS organisations are under, and how you can support the organisational objectives and strategies and performance targets, etc., as well as, of course, helping them to deliver improvements in care.
Thanks, Sally. Nice and short and concise, but great advice. Giovanna, quick fire. What was your one key piece of advice, and maybe some of the learnings that you had? What would be the one piece of advice that you would?
Evidence, and make sure you belong to the ABHI.
Thank you. And that actually, before, although I will come to it at the end, but we also should mention about being part of the HealthTech Alliance. And I should have asked Nick, how can people join the HealthTech Alliance? And what's your one recommendation?
So thank you for the plug. It'd be great if they joined. Go to healthtechalliance.uk. All the information is there, and my colleagues and I will receive an email from you, and we can take you through all the benefits. So that's how joining HealthTech Alliance, and thank you for the plug, Chloe. I think there is it's been alluded to today. I think the last 18 months, maybe 2 years, we've seen enormous change that impacts on the health tech and on the digital space. We have seen literally a new body after new organisation, new programs, new initiatives, new strategic reviews, new test beds, new pilots. Literally every other month, something new has come out. Whether that's AI awards that was announced by the Secretary of State at our first event 9 months ago, whether it's the changes of the AAC, HealthTech Connect, PCNs, that's primary care networks, end of tariff, moving to blended rates, new data collaboration centre at NHSX, literally numerous changes. So my one thing would be keep up to date, because there's things that keep being announced, new monies, new pots, new test beds that I think companies can apply for and should be applying for.
Thanks, Nick. And finally coming to you, Andrew, what's your key recommendation? One recommendation.
Okay, I think in a nutshell, it's keep it real. What do I mean by that? Tell your investors that your technology is disruptive. Don't lead with that in your NHS messaging, because disruptive to investors is attractive. Disruptive to the NHS who are busy is not as attractive a message. And so remember, it's not just about your product or your technology. It's how your product interacts with the protocol and the pathway. So if you look at Stoke, it's the clinicians are very clear. The pathway change involving our technology, but not being the only factor. That's what halved the rate of DVTs in that hospital. So always be modest, if you like. Understand that your product is just a piece of the jigsaw, and it's about making the whole jigsaw work.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Yeah, and obviously we do hear about disruptors, and that word is bandied around quite a lot, and it's okay in the right context, but as you say, maybe not. Think about your audience.
Yes.
So we're coming up to the last sort of 15 minutes or so here. So I'd just like to go into some questions that we're getting through from the audience. So one of them was obviously about AHSNs, and Giovanna, you helpfully mentioned that Eastern AHSN have been really fantastic support to you. Just like to ask the rest of the panel, are there any other particularly helpful AHSNs that you would like to just give a shout out to?
We've worked with the one in the Northwest, and that's been very good for introducing us into Liverpool and Lancashire area. The Manchester Innovation Group has been good, introducing us to Manchester Royal Infirmary, amongst others. So they've been very proactive.
Thanks, Andrew.
Can I chip in there, and just to say that at many of the meetings we have representatives from all the academic health science networks who attend and join in. So it might be a good way of meeting others we haven't met.
Thank you. Thanks, Nick. Oh, Sally, you're on mute.
Well, obviously, the button on my computer is not working. I think I would just say is that they are all different, and although that then makes it potentially tricky to think who's best to work with, they do actually have a collaborative where they all come together as well, and that's always with an office, etc., and that's a good place to start, because they've all got different expertise and different experience in different areas, and that's the benefit of having the number of AHSNs that there are. So if you come across one and doesn't quite deliver what you thought you needed, that doesn't mean that another one isn't going to be a better place to help you. So don't give up. They're a great idea.
Great point.
Thanks, I've got a question for Nick here. From the recommendations that are in your report, which one is the most challenging?
I think the ones that are most challenging are the ones that are out of our hands. I mean, I think the key one is actually getting legislative change. So the amendment to the 2012 Health and Social Care Act and getting government to find the parliamentary time to change the legislation. The NHS wants it to happen. Getting that parliamentary time, I think, is the challenge, but that will be the fundamental change, a decoupling of the payer provider, allowing ICSs, these new integrated care systems, to have their own funds and to act locally to address the problems locally. that is the biggest issue, that because it's just out of our control, we need to lobby to make that happen.
Thanks, Nick. There's a question for perhaps each of you might like to chip in with an example of what's the best example of significant spread and scale that you've had or perhaps have been involved in, Sally and Nick? Don't know who would like to take it first.
We've been a couple of members of the HealthTech Alliance. The latest one, iRhythm, which is a cardiac arrhythmia patch. That's literally just been approved by NICE. The challenges there were sort of educating NICE in a sense. The evaluation was the tough part there. I think a lot of the problem with new technologies, particularly AI, is that the evaluation's not quite there yet. Having the people with the right skill sets and the right knowledge to make the evaluation, particularly if like NICE has been very geared up for pharma for many years. I think building the skill set to evaluate new technologies and innovations is the big challenge. But iRhythm has managed to achieve that, and this weekend got guidance, and that's looked to get huge take up.
I'm off mute. So I think for understandable reasons, I actually sadly can't talk about most of the things I've been doing as part of my business because of client confidentiality. So I'm going to have to go back to earlier. I think on a national scale, I was very much involved with the rollout of interoperative fluid management. We're going back about 8 years ago now, which was, interesting enough, was a national initiative in the precursor to the Accelerated Access Collaborative. And what was important about that, and it plays into what Andrew was saying, is that was a technology that needed to be introduced into a care pathway and into a bundle of care to actually have its impact. So that was something, although it was complicated, the evidence was that it was definitely going to have very good outcomes for patients. And of course, I'm also going to say that both when I was at NTAC and at NICE, I had a role in working around the gecko. Right from a very early meeting when I met with members of the company to talk to them about the evidence they needed to generate. So there we go. It's a small world.
We're getting there. Thank you for your guidance, Sally.
Yeah, it was over a decade ago now, I have to say.
Yes, it's taken a while.
Yeah.
What was I should have added to that, what was the sort of magic for getting that spread and scale there, but both of you and Nick?
Shall I chip in first? What was the magic? I think it was doing lots of things, getting on the new AI award, building their profile, doing what Andrew was saying, and what Giovanna was saying is in building those relationships with clinicians in hospitals, building that evidence. It's classic. There's no one thing. There's no silver bullet. It's actually doing all of it consistently, making sure your messaging is right. And I think that's what has happened with iRhythm, just getting it right and doing all the things possible and jumping on new programs and new initiatives that are out there.
If I just go next to talk about the fluid management, that's a really interesting question, because there were two levels to this. On a national basis, every trust was expected to do this, and they were given an incentivization, a financial incentivization through a sequin payment. So that worked for the NHS, and it's undoubtedly helped to drive it out. However, the reality was that lots of clinicians felt that they were being forced to use a technology when they weren't always convinced from their patient's point of view it was the right thing. And that's another really important thing to recognise about the way that the NHS functions and how these decisions are made, and whether or not they're necessarily, sometimes the finance can drive organisational behaviours for understandable reasons.
Thanks, Sally and Nick. Andrew, I'll come to you, and I just wondered if you've got any particular examples, maybe from sort of your previous career, previous roles even, or perhaps examples that you look up to out there in medtech world of, where you've seen that spread and scale that's been done really impressively?
I was actually thinking about it because we're, at Sky with Gecko, we're still in the earlier stages of that, so I can't use that as an example. Certainly in previous roles, I've got a background in wound care, and so it just helps when you've got enough of the right things together. I don't think there is a single secret sauce. I think if I think of the things that did really well, wound care purists would know the Aquacel, Alevin, etc. It was a combination of, actually in both cases, there was an understanding of the market need. For Exudate, for Alevin, infection for Aquacel AG, Silver. And so you need the market need to be widely understood. Then you need to show that you are a solution to that need, and ideally the best one. And then really at that time, I was working for companies who could scale. So there's definitely a financial element, but we certainly still came across disincentives, things in the system that actually work against innovation and adoption. And we also came across, as Sally was just saying there, clinicians making individual decisions about whether they like, silver or iodine or some other type of antimicrobial as a personal preference. So it's multifactorial, it really is. But I think the comment about you've just got to do quite a lot of things well in parallel to really make it work is the right answer.
Thanks, Andrew. And Giovanna, are there any particular examples of spread and scale that you've seen that you really look up to?
I can't really think of any, because all the smaller pieces of medtech like ours have struggled like we have to get spread and scale. And I think Sally said earlier, you have to get the people at the front line to like what you're doing. That's fine, and that's actually more easily done than one would think, but it's getting the buyers, the procurement people, to actually buy into what you're doing, because unless they agree to buying it, people at the front line can't use it. So it's I don't know one single thing that has succeeded with rapidity. I wish I could say ours has, but it's taken an awfully long time. I think we're on a par with Gecko there. So I just think, I think the NHS is getting much better, and I think the HSNs are helping. I think, the HealthTech bodies are helping, and I think things are improving. But thus far, it's not been easy, and we've been hindered rather than helped. And I'm very happy that that's changing now.
Chloe, if I can just make one additional comment, there's a saying that banks will always lend you money the moment you don't need them to lend you money. And in many ways, if a company can generate a randomized controlled trial perfectly structured with a stat significant result, there's plenty of help from that point onwards. But I think probably more could be done to say, okay, medtech, unlike pharma, has a long tail of quite small companies. And those small companies may have hit on the most incredible device, to bring benefit to patients in multiple pathways, etc. But you're unlikely to be able to start with a 1,000 patient, several arm comparative study. So I wonder if there is a way, and I think some of the programs and initiatives Nick talked about earlier, I think what I'd be hopeful for is, a more realistic path. So if you have a device and you are not a company that can go out and pay multi-millions for a randomized controlled trial on day one, is there a way of doing sensible evaluations or real world evaluations to build the information to then design your randomized controlled trial? I think more can be done in the development of evidence phase. By the time you get absolutely perfect evidence, you don't need as much help, actually.
Thanks, Andrew. And we're literally coming to the very, very end now. So I just wanted to sort of iterate some of the themes, and Nick touched on at the beginning, actually, around the importance of collaboration and best practice sharing as well. So I just wanted to iterate that obviously we at Bob, we're also a startup and we're trying to spread and scale as well. So we totally understand and hear your challenges, but we are sort of all in it together, and we're here to help each other. And I think that collaboration piece comes through loud and clear, and that's something that's really key to us at Bob as well. So we are here to help. If anyone wants to help sharing their story and telling stories of how they've got implementation within the UK, do get in touch and take a look as well at the work that Andrew's team have done in Stoke. Is a great example. So yeah, I just wanted to summarise, and we are literally at the end, we're on the last minute, so I just wanted to say a massive thank you to all our speakers, Sally, Nick, Andrew and Giovanna. And yeah, it's a conversation that could keep going for hours, and I think there's lots to be done, but please do check out all the links that Neil has shared, and share your thoughts as well using the hashtag unpack the how on social media, and we'll keep the conversation going. But for now, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.